With that, I'd like to introduce Greg Barton, the Director of Problem Solving Courts for the state of Maryland. Welcome to Justice Speaks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I'd like you to start by telling me about yourself.
Well, I started in treatment courts back in 1997. But prior to that, I was actually a treatment provider. And coming to treatment courts, I realized that there was a big disconnect between treatment and the courts and probation. And so that's why treatment courts was very intriguing to me. And so I worked as a local coordinator in Mansfield, Ohio for a couple of years in the district court, the misdemeanor court level, and then went to the felony court level for a couple of years. And then I wanted to move back home, and so I moved back to Maryland almost 21 years ago.
Let me pause and
Yeah.
say, how in the heck did you get to that place called Ohio? So you got a permission.
That's tough, right? Well, go Buckeyes. It was I followed a job. It was, again, back then I was very young, young family, and I went from different positions as in counseling and treatment. As you know, there's a lot of turnover in treatment, especially for young ones. And so I was one of those that's that. So followed one of my supervisors that was in Western Maryland. He recruited me to go out to Ohio. And
Okay.
that's when I did fall in love with the Buckeyes, though I'm a church. I fell in love with the Buckeyes.
Well, everybody has their faults. Let me just say then, how did you get involved in treatment courts? Was that there?
It was brand new. Literally there was 2 job openings at the time in '97. One for the misdemeanor court, one for the felony court. Another treatment provider, actually you may know her, Megan Wheeler, who works for All Rise now.
Mm-hmm.
She took the felony position, I took the misdemeanor position, and we started the treatment courts from there. And so it was very new. We had to grab, I mailed a letter to Miami to get any information they had. It was very rudimentary. I went around to other treatment courts in the state of Ohio. Akron was one of them, Youngstown, went to Dayton, went to go see some of their courts just to see what was going on. And that's kind of, back then, that was how you learned. It was you had to go travel and go see how people were doing it there.
So what led you back to Maryland?
Family, really. It was I wanted to be closer to my family. One of my kids were young when we moved back. They were 5 and 6. I wanted them to be closer to their grandparents and cousins and stuff. That's really what brought me back. The opportunity to go from a county coordinator position to obviously the state coordinator position in Maryland was a big incentive. But that wasn't the draw. It was I actually looked first, and then this came about. So it really was just timing was perfect for me.
So you became the state coordinator about 21 years ago.
Yep, 21 this November.
So you've been leading the drug court effort on some levels in Maryland for that period of time.
Yes.
And what is involved in your job?
Oh goodness, how long do you have now? Yeah, no, I mean, to summarize, obviously we have over $8 million in grant funds that we grant. So I'm a grantor to the local jurisdictions, only to the courts, both district and circuit courts. And I'm a big advocate, obviously, and so we don't lobby in the judiciary. I educate our legislators about problem solving courts.
Okay.
And so that's a big role. Meeting with legislators, talking to them. We do ride-alongs. We call them ride-alongs, where we bring them because our legislative session is only 90 days. So they're part-time legislators. So they have the summer and fall really to do other things and work on their own. But those are the times that I actually take them around to and their staff to treatment courts.
Okay.
And I will say, and I'll knock on wood, is have fairly good relationship with our legislature in terms of funding. We've been very lucky, and our legislators are very supportive of our treatment courts. And so that's so advocacy and education. The other part of education is training and education for our treatment court teams That's a big thing. We don't have a state association.
I was gonna ask you,
Sorry,
you don't
yeah.
have a state association, so it really pretty much falls on your
It
office.
does, and we've had, we've had some individuals that wanted to start it up, and and I've never persuaded them other than saying it's on you to do that, not on the judiciary. Maryland judiciary to do that. We'll support in any way we can. But really, we do that. We do the training, we do the advocacy. We send out notices of funding, whether it be ours or other federal funders like BJA or SAMHSA or OJJDP or even local state ones. So, we're de facto like a state association with my little team. I'm sure there's a lot more things that could happen with the state association, but we've kind of taken over that role.
So you must do an annual conference.
We do an annual conference, yeah. Last 2 years have been virtual for obvious reasons.
How'd that go for you?
Actually, smoother than I would have thought. Being an old guy here, I was very worried about being virtual and having all the things that could go wrong with your presenters now all over the country, coming in at all these breakouts going at the same time. But it actually went very well. We had a great response. I was able to invite some other states to come in and do it. I partnered with Delaware. I partnered with Washington D.C. Just to come in, just to share what we had, since there was a new state coordinator in Delaware, so it was a partnership that I said, kind of mentorship, to say let's bring them in. So we had some of our Delaware courts and judges attend that, but it went very well, very well. Yeah, but this will be coming up in November. We will have I believe it's our 19th annual.
And is that gonna be live?
That will be in person. That will be in Towson on November 8th and 9th.
Okay, and if somebody wants information about that, where will they go?
So they could, well, right now, because the contract is still wet.
It's wet.
So nothing has been out yet other than by word of mouth. But typically our website, which is at ndcourts.gov/OPSC, Office of Problem Solving Courts.
Okay, and they go there and they can find out all
See
about
the
the
events
conference
page, yeah,
and see.
how to
Good.
register and other things about our.
And how many people were you getting at your conferences prior to the COVID?
So prior to COVID, every year we hit up, so in 19, which are our last live one, we maxed out at 400 in our site. I'm sorry, 450, the place, so 450. This year, we have enough room for 500.
Okay, so
and
you're expecting a few more?
Yeah, every
things
year.
go well.
We have more treatment courses than we did before, and because of that, even though it was virtual, and we had about anywhere from 400 to 500 people on our virtual site too, even it was virtual, the connections that you have at those conferences are really what, obviously the education's important, but it really is the connections.
Well, I've said this many times, I think there's an informal learning that goes along with the formal learning.
Yeah.
And that changes how you do things, because somebody will say, well, we do this, and you realize that will work for you, or it doesn't work for you, even though you had the question from the formal training.
Mhm.
And so I think that makes a real difference, and I agree with you that in-person conferences tend to be better.
Yeah, and there's a lot more questions, right? You tend to, and I find myself doing the same thing, you tend to multitask when you're sitting in your office.
Right.
And have multiple screens, and you start answering emails, and when it's over or close to over, you're ready to just be over. Whereas when you're in person, a lot of times you'll go up and speak to us, even if you don't want to ask a question in a open session. A lot of times you'll wait and do a one-on-one. So I think that it does encourage a lot more.
And my experience has been that you don't get a lot of email questions after a presentation, because people have moved on to whatever the demands of the daily job that they've been away from. So you don't get that follow-up in that way. So I agree with you, that's an important thing. Do you, besides your conferences, do you do other types of trainings?
Yes. So we try to have trainings throughout the course of the year. Actually, one thing that we did, and this kind of, again, pushed me along as the old guy, that pushed me along, but when the pandemic hit, the one thing that I started immediately was I had, this is the progression, I actually had weekly phone conferences with all my coordinators and judges. And then it slowly went to Skype meetings. Then it went to ultimately we had bi-weekly Zoom meetings. And I did mini trainings because it was one of those things where, again, nobody knew what was going on, right?
Right.
That's a universal. And so I felt as a community, as a treatment court community, we need to stick together because, our population that we're serving, I mean, we had to take care of ourselves too, but
Right.
also the population we were serving really needed us. So I felt it was important that we connect as often as possible. And like I said, we eventually went to Zoom, which was much easier than the phone conferences. Let me just put that out there. But that was really impactful. Again, that connection. Then I started adding in trainings, those webinars that again was foreign to me prior to the pandemic. And so webinars have become a very natural thing for us to do. And so yes, we'll do. We call them lunch and learns.
Right.
So we did it right at noon. That way we didn't interfere with any docket times. And then since the pandemic, we've gone back to in-person trainings, team trainings.
Those lunch and learns, do you record them so people who can't attend them can watch them later?
We did, though I wasn't able to post them. Again, I was very new in it. What I know now is not what I knew then. So I did record them, but I realized that the recordings weren't suitable for prime time, right?
Okay.
They're good to look for all the learning things, the things how to do them now, right? What not to do, maybe.
Yeah. So how are treatment or problem-solving courts in your state funded?
So primarily, they're funded through state appropriation. So we get from legislature, and then comes through the judiciary, and then through our chief justice. Well, my office and the chief justice ultimately, we fund them that way. Now, they get funding from various other places like everybody else. So there could be other federal grants, state grants, and local contributions, obviously. But a good chunk of it comes from our funding.
What I found interesting is both New Mexico and Texas are funding their courts off the liquor tax. And it's provided in a very small percentage of the liquor tax.
Right.
And it's provided very large amounts of money to fund the courts. I just mentioned that as something if you want to educate your legislators on.
Definitely, and that was something when I first started, 20 years ago. That was brought up as a point, and we never got that. We never got to that point, and so I'll just leave it at that. Never got past the discussion points.
How do you think problem-solving courts in your state can be improved?
Gosh, of course, mine are the best in the country, so I'll just put that out there.
Okay.
My teams know that. No, but improvements, is continual growth in education. I mean, I had, as I mentioned to you, I had a team meeting yesterday where anybody that could make it from Maryland at this conference could join. And the one thing I stressed to them was whether this is your first time at this training or there was somebody that was their 15th time at this training, is that you're going to learn something new, and you need to understand that what we know today is not what we knew 15 years ago or even last year. And so we always have to improve. And that's one of the biggest things, probably the biggest struggle I have is I have a lot of veteran court, not veteran treatment court, but older courts, well-established courts. And good for me, I have a lot of team members that were there for 15 years, 10 years. The only downside is, and they were trained by national leaders, but a lot of that information was what we knew then, and what we know now is different. And it's tough sometimes to go in knowing now, and what I'll hear is, well, that's not what we were taught. I'm like, well, that was what you were taught in
That's because as you learn more, you have to adjust.
Right. So that's really one of our biggest issues is and partly is because not the whole team can come to something like Rise 23, and for the last couple of years with the symposium, we call it the Problem Solving Court Symposium, being virtual, I didn't see the ones that need to be there weren't there, right? They didn't make the priority. So that's probably the biggest thing.
All right. What do you think your office's biggest accomplishment has been?
Oh, goodness. I think promotion of treatment courts. I think my office, I'll be the first one to say, my biggest thing is that the local courts they thrive. You know, is that I try not to take any credit for what happens in Maryland, because, you know, what I feel is my best asset is the local teams and all the team members on there, and obviously the participants that go through that. So my biggest accomplishment is what happens in the field. I go to as many events as I can, as my schedule allows, graduations and hearings. And I have staff that go to staffings and hearings all the time. And, you know, the impact I get back from them and see what comes from our you know, all this hard work is really, that's really impactful.
It strikes me that your observation of these individual court meetings, team meetings, would tend to drive best practices because they know you're watching. And
Definitely.
I don't mean that in any negative way.
No.
But I mean it in the sense of if somebody's moving astray, you can help them.
So you mentioned best practices. So we recently had had all of our adult treatment courts do a best practice assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll soon, our family recovery courts will do the same thing when that comes out. And what we did with that assessment, I will tell you, so it's self-assessment, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got the reports back, I realized that there were some courts that were underselling what they did or overselling what they did. And so I asked my team, I have a team of 3 program managers, to meet with each one of the courts individually and make sure that what it says as they were meeting or not meeting a best practice, to just verify, trust but verify, like we do our participants. And we found out that there was some inaccuracies, inconsistencies, and it was actually, as a state, lower than that original self-assessment. So we, you know, by doing that, it actually went down. The adherence to best practices went down as a state because we checked on it. But what that did, kind of to your point, what it did was it encouraged our courts then to look at the best practice and say, how can we meet this and that? And here recently, I'm sorry, because this is one thing I am proud of as the Maryland Judiciary doing. We have now a dashboard that our coordinators can see how they're meeting best practices in relation to the rest of the state. So are they below the state average? And every time somebody improves or decreases, but typically it's been here recently, it's been improves, that number goes up. So there's always going higher and higher to reach that goal.
And I think this is something unique, because in the interviews I've done, I've not encountered this before, where the office is going out and participating in an informal way, helping people do best practices. The dashboard's another good idea.
Fantastic. It really, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how well the coordinators responded to it. They actually took to it the ones I've spoken to after the training, they really took to this and loved the idea of being able to see it like a dashboard, see where they are, and also we developed it so you can actually tell where you're deficient very easily, right? You didn't have to go through a large document to see where I'm deficient in this or that. It was a very easy tool, and so I immediately had teams go, hey, we're able to meet this and this and this best practice now. Now that I saw it, we're not deficient. So they immediately, and of course we trust but verify, you know, to make sure that when they say that they do have a policy on it or they are practicing that best practice. So yes, it really did encourage them to do it. I like competitive things, so it kind of give them a competitive to see where they are statewide, right?
Where do you see problem-solving courts being in 10 years in your state?
In my state, I think that I'll actually have to answer your question a little odd, because where problem-solving courts are is going to be different. Because I think in my state, the system will be changing even more. You know, we've been 30 years of treatment courts, and we've already seen huge changes in criminal justice and how we treat individuals in courts, right? I foresee that shift will actually probably double that of the next 10 years or 20 years than we did the last 30. I see we have a new Chief Justice, and he is very dedicated to this initiative. And I see that across the states. I speak to other state coordinators, and I see that motion. I sit on, when I go down to the judicial council, and I count how many individuals, how many judges on the appellate level, on the high levels, used to be or still are in problem-solving court. So all the problem-solving court stuff we had to work to get are creeping up into the leadership, the much greater leadership. So I think, I guess my non-answer is, I don't think treatment courts are going to.
Sorry, it's like you keep calling yourself old. That was an answer.
The treatment courts will still be there for a certain population, but I think it's going to grow, that the whole court system will really embrace this, looking at the individual and why they're here, not the charge that brought them there.
I want to thank you for taking time to have this conversation. Is there anything you'd like to share about your courts in Maryland before we close?
Just as I always say, they're the best in the country. I always have that.
It's important to be proud.
I'm very proud of my teams.
Great. I want to thank you for coming on Justice Speaks.